Hello everyone, welcome to the December 5th evening edition of Diplomatic Brief. The Chinese lead representative for China-US economic and trade talks, Vice Premier He Lifeng, held a video call with the US lead representatives, Treasury Secretary and Trade Representative. Both sides had an in-depth and constructive discussion on implementing the consensus reached at the summit between the two heads of state in San Francisco and during the November 24th call, as well as on carrying out practical cooperation in the next steps and properly addressing each other's concerns in the economic and trade fields. Both sides positively evaluated the implementation of outcomes from the China-US economic and trade consultations in Kuala Lumpur. They stated that, under the strategic guidance of the two heads of state, they would continue to utilize the China-US economic and trade consultation mechanism, continuously expand cooperation, reduce issues, and promote steady, positive development of China-US economic and trade relations. The Chinese side's press release was brief, using relatively positive language, indicating the economic and trade relationship between the two countries has moved from the low point of the tariff war toward a stable balance. On the other hand, after Trump reached a trade agreement with China, his diplomatic strategy became more focused on the Western Hemisphere, especially on strengthening control over Latin American countries close to the US. In the Eastern Hemisphere, the pressure on China was noticeably reduced. Many of America's Asia-Pacific allies started acting independently, and as for Indian Prime Minister Modi, he once again challenged Russian President Putin, showing a strong Trump-like approach. Meanwhile, Japan and South Korea, which were highly valued during the Biden era, have started to feel uneasy. On December 4th, a German media outlet published an article pointing out that the transactional diplomacy of the Trump administration has already triggered heightened vigilance in both Japan and South Korea. Trump's Ukraine policy has been criticized for aligning with Russia's stance, while regarding China, he has sought frequent efforts to ease relations. This has made Japan and South Korea worry that the US might sacrifice the interests of its allies and reach compromises with China and Russia, especially amid the recent disputes between China and Japan. Trump's demand that Japan not provoke China has made Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi even more uneasy. An analysis article from Deutsche Welle states that America's core allies, Japan and South Korea, are increasingly worried. The Trump administration's approach to issues involving Ukraine and China is part of a broader transactional diplomacy, and this approach could ultimately harm the interests of America's allies. For example, the so-called 28-point Ukraine peace plan recently proposed by the Trump administration is, in essence, favorable to Russia. Even with a revised, more moderate version of the hardline demands being introduced and negotiations still ongoing, Trump has repeatedly signaled the possibility of abandoning Ukraine. On the China issue, after provoking intense trade conflicts, Trump now wants to ease tensions. U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent said that Trump plans to meet with Chinese leaders 4 times next year, including a state visit to China in April and a reciprocal visit by the Chinese side to the U.S. in the second half of the year, Bessent also said. These meetings are expected to bring significant stability to bilateral relations. The article states that as America's two closest allies in Asia, South Korea and Japan, have remained silent regarding Trump's actions. Even so, many observers in Japan and South Korea interpret U.S. foreign policy as Trump taking sides, attempting to conquer weaker countries, similar to what Russia has done. They believe such situations could be repeated in the Pacific region. Jeff Kingston, Director of Asian Studies at Temple University's Tokyo campus, said that Trump's betrayal of Ukraine has cast a huge shadow over America's allies in Asia and the region. These allies are now questioning the reliability of their alliance with the United States. He also mentioned that Japan and South Korea have seen Trump getting closer to Russia, China, and even North Korea, while at the same time being pressured on trade issues. This has made them worry about how the United States would respond if an emergency were to occur in the Taiwan Strait. Kingston also said that Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi recently provoked a dispute with China, but Trump did not immediately express support for Takaichi, which may have left him feeling disappointed. Although Sanai Takaichi has so far refused to retract her statements, it is understood that when Trump called her on November 24th to ask her not to provoke China, this made her feel even more uneasy. Kingston said that Trump's recent visit to Japan was productive, and after Sanai Takaichi promised to invest in the United States, she was actually expecting more support from him. She hoped that Trump would publicly state that Japan is the cornerstone of peace in the region and emphasize the strength of their alliance. But Trump, however, he just told her not to provoke China, which was not the strong stance Sanae Takaichi was hoping for. What Japan is worried about now is the possibility of the US and China forming a so-called G2 bloc, directly ignoring Japan's existence. This highlights how Tokyo's influence is gradually declining, and South Korea shares the same concerns. At the same time, Japan, bowing to Trump's demands, promised to invest $550 billion in American industries. South Korea then agreed to provide $350 billion in cash investments and to follow suit. A $150 billion shipbuilding cooperation project is included. Professor Im Hyun-jung from Kongju National University's International Studies Department in South Korea said the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung comes from a left-leaning political party and had conflicting positions with the Trump administration. When it comes to national alliances, he is a pragmatist. South Korea is uncertain about how much the United States cares about disputes in the Yellow Sea between China and South Korea. It's also unclear if China takes further action, would the Trump administration step in to help? South Korea is also worried that as part of Trump's transactional approach to international relations, the US military presence in South Korea might be reduced. Although Trump has not yet threatened to cut US troops in South Korea during his second term, in his first term he did use troop costs as leverage to pressure South Korea. Now, it's not out of the question that he might use the same tactic again. In fact, on December 2nd, Trump once again publicly mocked his allies. While presiding over the last US cabinet meeting of the year, he said that the historic tariffs he introduced had made a lot of money for the country. And as for the major allies, for many years they've been leeching off the US. He said that those countries who've been draining us dry include our allies, but for so many years, they've just been taking advantage of us. When Trump got to this point, he paused, then said, I don't want to name names. I won't name Japan. I won't name South Korea either, will I? Hearing Trump mock Japan and South Korea like this, Defense Secretary Esper, who was sitting nearby, couldn't help but laugh. But Japan and South Korea probably didn't find it funny. The conservative South Korean newspaper Chosun Ilbo believes that Trump's recent remarks about Japan and South Korea not only compare America's allies to its main strategic competitor, China, but also belittle these allies, highlighting a softening in Trump's stance toward China. The conclusion is that whether it's Japan or South Korea, whenever a US president with a different governing philosophy comes to power, sometimes they become anti-China, and sometimes they turn these countries into mere actors on the stage. Only they themselves know the hardship. If these countries don't have enough strength or strategic resolve, and they blindly follow the US too closely on the anti-China path, they'll end up crashing when the US suddenly hits the brakes. In addition, President Xi Jinping met with Macron in Dujiangyan, Chengdu. According to Xinhua news agency, the report described the early winter in Dujiangyan as the mountains turning green, and when Macron and his wife arrived, they were warmly received by Xi Jinping and his wife Peng Liyuan. Xi Jinping welcomed Macron to the land of heaven, saying, "Last year you invited me to your hometown in the Champagne region. I believe this visit will further enrich your understanding of China." President Xi then introduced Dujiangyan. He also pointed out the significance of the Dujiangyan irrigation project, saying that it is to this day the only ancient irrigation project in the world that is still in use. It is also one of the earliest successful examples of harmonious coexistence between humans and nature. The construction process fully reflects the Chinese nation's spirit of perseverance, resilience in the face of difficulties, and courage to innovate. Every time he visits Dujiangyan, he can feel how the ancestors adapted measures to local conditions. Going with the flow, achieving harmony between man and nature, and the greatness of managing water and governing the people, all of these offer wisdom for state governance. The French nation also possesses a spirit of perseverance. China and France should set an example for other countries in fostering greater mutual understanding and respect. He also mentioned that Dujiangyan is surrounded by beautiful mountains and rivers with stunning scenery. The water conservancy project, built over 2,000 years ago, is still functioning today. The diligence and wisdom of the Chinese people are truly admirable. Both France and China have long histories and rich cultures, and the pursuit of a better life is something our peoples share. Through cooperation, China and France can jointly seek development and prosperity, benefiting both nations. President Xi emphasized that national strength and rejuvenation require not only the accumulation of material civilization, but also the flourishing of spiritual civilization. Only a nation with cultural confidence can stand firm, remain steady, and go far. Chinese civilization is the only great civilization in the world that has continued uninterrupted and developed in the form of a nation to this day. It is distinguished by its continuity, innovation, unity, inclusiveness, and peacefulness. China and France are outstanding representatives of Eastern and Western civilizations, respectively. The independent spirit shared by both countries stems from their profound cultural heritage. The establishment of diplomatic relations between China and France is a convergence of two brilliant civilizations. Amidst a complex international landscape, these two great countries can, through dialogue and cooperation, contribute to world peace, stability, and human progress. Macron noted the rapidly evolving, uncertain international situation. France seeks stronger communication and coordination with China, resolving issues via dialogue and consultation. Working together to safeguard world peace and stability. In short, President Xi's reception of Macron in Dujiangyan can be summarized in two main points. First, it was an act of reciprocity, as Xi visited Macron's hometown during his trip to France. Second, Xi's reception in Dujiangyan was innovative, highlighting the concept of harmony between man and nature. The green economy is an area with relatively few disputes between China and Europe, offering room for cooperation in the future. Thirdly, President Xi spoke extensively about mutual learning between Chinese and French civilizations. He was also sending a message to Western elites to truly understand Chinese civilization, especially with that statement: Chinese civilization is the only great civilization in the world that has continued uninterrupted and developed into a nation-state to this day. This also serves as a reminder to other countries not to attempt to undermine China's national rejuvenation. On the evening of December 5th, French President Macron left Chengdu, concluding his visit to China. He posted on social media expressing gratitude for this enlightening visit and thanking the Chinese side for their warm and friendly hospitality. Even though Macron is still immersed in memories of his trip to China, especially his interactions with the Chinese table tennis team in Chengdu and the warm welcome he received from students at Sichuan University, these are the kinds of photo opportunities that Western politicians particularly enjoy. However, France's economic elites have drawn even deeper insights. They believe that although France's investment in China is still 3 times that of China's investment in France, China has already established a significant advantage in fields such as batteries, photovoltaics, and electric vehicles. The president of France's public investment bank, Dickel, wrote to Agence France-Presse, saying, "Everything has been reversed. We in France are now the emerging country, while they, the Chinese, are the developed country." Paris has also acknowledged that, over the past 40 years, it was mainly Europe transferring technology to China, but now the situation has changed. A complete reversal.